You're listening to Hooters Juniors, the Durgan McFlurgStang story. From Sad Picture Productions. Hi, I'm your host. Episode 1, Radio Frequencies. VISCOUS. Viscous. Viscous, Colorado is a town most people have never heard of, and never will. Having grown up hating white people, I didn't think I'd ever find myself in a place like this. Big tractor trailers, father-daughters, hay stores, tobacco fields, radioactive waste burials, and farmers markets were not my kind of jam. However, as a young, fresh-faced journalist at the age of 23, I didn't have a lot of choices of where I was going. I went where the stories took me. And in March of 2001, a source, who still to this day wishes to remain anonymous, sent me an email with 2 words: Hooters Juniors. Internet only having existed 2 years prior to this, and Google still being in its infancy, I was forced to sit on a park bench for weeks asking strangers if they knew anything about a Hooters Juniors. After multiple failed leads, in August, I got my first taste of something real, and it tasted. An old street rat named Crime Todd I'd known from my earlier days as an assistant reporter for the Washington Post had given me the number of somebody in Colorado. Somebody he made certain to insist was legit as Krill, brother. I first met McFlurgStang in 2002, outside a Walgreens parking lot. He was wearing a tan wife beater and had just finished stuffing the last of his Percocets back into his shoes. There was an oil smeared from the top of his breast down to his belt. He propped himself on the hood of his trunk, opening up a can of dip with one hand and a copy of John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men with the other. This was a planned meeting between us. At first glance, Durgan seems like the kind of person you would want to avoid on the street. Holding one nostril closed, he harshly blows mucus from the other out onto the sidewalk. His corduroy jeans show the remnants of his act being repeated often, and his left arm, blackened from the tobacco-stained mucus, works to cut the falling strings.
Boy, nice to finally meet you. Coming out of the bush already? Ain't got no internet in it. Ha, fair dinkum on that one. Hey, I'm Chris. Sorry, nope, not yet.
McFlurgStang first came to Viscous in 1992, in a town full of heritage, interconnected families, xenophobia, and a fear of foreign empirical rule. It took the town some time warming up to the already fiery demeanor of an Australian outsider who claims to originate from the deep outback. But that wasn't going to stop Durgan. You see, Durgan didn't come here to get away. He didn't come here to hide or join the heritage of having your father be the same person as your sister. Durgan came here for one thing, and one thing only: to make money. It was just 3 years earlier that he had first arrived in the United States to meet a girlfriend that he had been dating online for 17 years. This was their first in-person meeting, and where else would it be than at Hooters? When Durgan first found himself at Hooters, he realized that in all of the excitement, he had rushed getting there. He let his soon-to-be physical girlfriend know that he was early, but that he would be okay to wait. Because, as Durgan describes it, he was having a good one on himself. However, Durgan waited, and waited, and waited. Bill Gates, the name of his online girlfriend, never showed, but someone else did. The founder of Hooters, who also approved us for the show because of all of the money we might donate if they accuse us of anything. And the wheels started turning. McFlurgStang spent 3 years in and out of different kitchens, strip clubs, prison, and housing shelters for homeless families. And in that time, he says,
I want three things. Good food, good women. You can't text me about them if I say so. And the kids need work. Idle hands. Can't judge me if I ain't been judged, yes?
not much was known about McFlurgStang prior to this meeting, by anyone, before his time in America and losing his real fake girlfriend, Bill Gates. No one seemed to know anything about Durgan. In my journey to get an interview with him, I called every name I could find, leaving messages without replies to numbers without recorded voicemails, until one day when I caught a stroke of luck and called the Hooters juniors that McFlurgStang happened to be inside at that very moment, directing employees. An employee, being severely scolded, handed me the phone, and I was surprised by the pleasant tone that came through the receiver. Hooters Juniors is the business McFlurgStang brought to Viscus. It was an idea so powerful, the town's legislators unanimously approved legislation for him to build larger structures, hire younger workers, and essentially take control of the entire town's economy and labor force. For a town of only 412 residents with an 89% unemployment rate at the time, this seemed revolutionary. Because McFlurgStang was still considered a resident of Australia at the time, and thus a criminal, local government also granted him tax-free status at his business and on any personal ventures made to the local shops.
Yeah, it bothered a lot of people, but that's why they made it legal for me, because I'm just gonna do it.
3 years after I first met McFlurgStang, I finished and published my piece in the Washington Journal titled Hooters Juniors, Where the Kids Are the Cooks. It was realistic. It outlined a man with control issues among his own family, co-workers, and the town he had taken over. A man with a history of acting without regards for others, and paying no attention to the economic impact his actions had on his surrounding neighbors. A man with a self-described, sketchy, but still unknown past, who was pouring gasoline on a town that had risen straight from the ashes and lighting it back on fire. The story was damning. It made the front pages of every rec center in the country. It made my career and brought me to where I am today, a professional podcaster and bottle recycling redemption master. I had originally questioned the validity of my own work. No matter how true, I couldn't help but feel that the piece I'd written was ruining a man's livelihood, maybe even his entire life, while immensely improving my own. However, it was only a week after the story first broke that I received a phone call that turned my life upside down and started it all. It was McFlurgStang. He said he had read this story, told me how much of a great job I had done, donated to my son's basketball team, and asked me how I was and if I was taking care of myself and my family. It was as if I had never wronged him, and while I waited months for the punches to come, they never did. He was completely void of negative feeling towards me, no matter what I had written about him, what I continued to write about him. He never budged. As a journalist coming up on 48 years, I've learned that this is an extremely rare event, but even with my limited experience at the time, I knew it then as well. Durgan and I kept in contact for more than 12 years after that. Almost weekly, he would catch me up to date on what was happening in his life, in ways that I'd come to only half believe, or know were things that he had painted in a certain light in order to keep the distance. That was how Durgan was. And I had come to accept early on in our professional relationship, as well as in our eventual friendship, that no matter how many questions you asked Durgan, by the end of a conversation about his past, you'd always end up alone on a boat fishing, having completely forgotten how you'd gotten there in the first place. It was in 2013 that I'd noticed McFlurgStang hadn't called me for 3 weeks. I was never one to contact him after our initial meeting, only to take his call after the third or fourth time of insistent ringing. So I found this to be Bizarre to say the least. I began making calls to Viscous Hooters Juniors, and that's when I was informed by a longtime employee that McFlurgStang hadn't been around the restaurant in weeks, and that neither had his wife. Oh yeah, now he had a wife. And that the sheriff, Wayno LeStronger Mononger, had received a text message from McFlurgStang weeks earlier, ordering him to shut down the police force and all associated radio frequencies. Having no other option since the change in legislation after his arrival in 1992, and not understanding what that actually meant about radio frequencies, the sheriff was forced to comply and had all stations, police vehicles, clothing, badges, and the personal belongings of each officer burned within 48 hours of receiving the order. That meant that any investigation, search, or missing persons report of McFlurgStang had no fuel to be fired up. There wasn't a single resident in Viscous with the authority to make a single call. Oh yeah, they burnt the power lines too. By the time I had called LeStronger Mononger, he was in the hospital from an apparent overdose of tanning drug injections. He was in shock that I hadn't received his message, and abruptly hung up the phone. I received another call from an unknown number that same day. It was an officer. After the line had cut, Wayno immediately pulled his own rifle on himself, ending his life. This puzzled me. A missing friend, who was now married? A dead sheriff who, okay, I guess he could get a gun in the hospital. He's a sheriff. And a message I couldn't find. I spent the night driving to Viscous, Colorado from Long Island, New York, and by 4 a.m., I had reached the first gas station in town. It was then, off in the distance, that I saw the reflection of flashing lights.
Police announcing tonight that the body of Durgan McFlurgStang, founder of Hooters Juniors, has been recovered in the river, which we but say they are investigating this because they are investigators, and they are investigating this as a homicide.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Hooters Juniors is brought to you by
Jazzhole.com.
Hi, I'm Maxo, founder and innovator of Jazzhole.com. I'm here to teach you how to use that Jazzhole. Everyone's got Jazzhole. Some big, some small. Some people ask me, hey Maxo, innovator and founder of Jazzhole.com. I got two guys that have more big to it. Where did you get that big Jazzhole? I ain't Maxo. I'm here to tell you that no, you can't, and stop it right now. Look, hey, how's it going? Look, my name's Maxo, and I'm founder and innovator of Jazzhole.com. I'm here to tell you that I use that Jazzhole. I teach you like all the favorites, such as Drake, Angus Wilson, Foursquare, Turnip, and Turnip Rising, from the Apocalypse Now soundtrack. I'm Maxo, and I'm here to tell you that 48 famous and famous founder and innovator of Jazzhole.com, ready to overtake a little extra hand in hand. I'm here to tell Val to teach you how to use that Jazzhole. My workshop. I'm Maxo, Jazzhole.com, the founder, the innovator. What are you waiting for? I'm not waiting for. All right, bye.
This is our co-producer.
So, do you mind stating your name and explaining how you first came to know Durgan?
Yeah, my name's John Taylor Bobcat John Deere Maynard II Alejandro.
What were your parents like?
I used to think Tool was a good band, but they were heavy into Hub and Lonnie's Outback Dr. Scientist McDr. Dana's office.
So, when did you first meet Durgan?
Yeah, so I first met Durgan must have been 1990, 91. Yeah, I was the very first cook at 11 years old.
What was your first impression?
Oh, he was a mean son, but I can't blame him. Would have potted me too if I was me, but I ain't now.
You think you were?
Well, yeah, no recollection of that entire time in my life.
Really?
Yep, none.
Why is that?
Durgan said it was a virus, but we used to keep lead on base to paint when we had no fun. Kept it going for years till them flyers started flying back up and we had to put them buckers to the curb.
I see.
Yeah, then there was the accident.
The accident?
Well,
What happened?
Durgan don't tell me, but it tell me I was involved.
But you don't know what happened?
Nah.
Do you ever think about what happened?
Wait, what?
After having spoken to many early employees of the first Hooters Juniors, this seems to be a reoccurring factor among their lives. And while I can't understand or hear everything John says, I know exactly what he means when he's saying it. Them boys used to be huffing lead and placing the remaining Jims, a slang for propaganda pamphlets against the Child Welfare Act, into burgers before frying them up and serving them, as well as the accident. This accident, that seemingly involved every single employee working there at the time, has never been fully disclosed to the boys in the kitchen, or the waitresses, whose names and records have seemingly also disappeared from the historical knowledge of, well, history. The only thing I could find in relation to this accident was a 1994 news clipping from the Bushed In, Bushed Out Times, a newspaper eventually bought, renamed, and closed down by McFlurgStang, stating that operations had closed for a new business, Horsewell Vodka, after a chemical explosion at the plant, and a resulting investigation by the FDA into why there were certain chemicals at a vodka production facility, as well as dispelling rumors that McFlurgStang himself was involved in this operation. It wasn't until I found Purpler Stronomer Megalanomanor, the only surviving witness who recalled anything about the accident, that I figured out this accident was no accident at all. This season on Hooters Juniors.
Were you or were you not in the car with Mr. McFlurgStang?
I don't know what a car is. Did you love him?
I knew it right then. I recognized that face anyway. He made a half-big thing.
Hey, is your name Kyle?
No, it's Chris. No, not yet.
No one would listen to me. I felt like I was screaming down the halls of an empty police station. And I was.
Hey, ma'am, I'm gonna need you to calm down or I'm just gonna stop listening.
Hooters Juniors, the Durgan McFlurgStang story, is hosted by me, your host, produced by producer, co-produced by co-producer, music made by musician. This podcast was made possible. Megalanomanor. God damn it. It wasn't until I found Purpler String. God damn it.